Well, President Bush has now arrived in Germany for the G8 summit, which is being held near the town of Rostock. On top of the agenda for the leaders of the world's wealthiest countries is climate change. The US and Germany in particular will have to overcome differences on how to tackle global warming. Lack of progress on previous pledges to eradicate poverty in Africa will also be discussed over the next 3 days.
Let's go live to Rostock and talk to our correspondent Harry Mutasa. Harry, those are all crucial issues that Stephen just talked about. But the fact of the matter is this summit is already being dominated by that deteriorating relationship between Russia and the US, isn't it?
Exactly, Felicity, that's right. And on the ground here at the summit, there are over 30 African organizations here, and they want Africa to be put on the agenda. But they're concerned, first of all, that Africa will not play a dominant role as it was supposed to. And secondly, they're saying to themselves, they've been asking themselves, why is the G8 leaders or G8 countries meeting again to discuss Africa, to discuss a new list of what to do to help Africa when they haven't achieved what they planned to do in the past, such things as aid, as trade barriers to African countries, debt cancellation, climate change, and HIV/AIDS in particular. They want more funding to go to HIV/AIDS, and in particular with debt cancellation, they're saying that not just a few countries should benefit, but all poor countries in the world should also have their debt cancelled as well. Also, a big concern on the ground is that the AU, the African Union, is actually at the summit. They will be attending some of the talks, and it's thought that obviously with them being here, it'll be peace and security that will be on the agenda, particularly Darfur and Somalia. A lot needs to be done on that side as well, and African organizations here at the summit have been saying that a lot more needs to be done. G8 countries had promised to fund the African Union to help solve the crisis in Darfur and Somalia, and up to now nothing has been done. So they want action, but they are concerned that other issues will dominate the agenda, as you rightfully said, Felicity.
Well, poverty and the problems of Africa, of course, dominated the last G8 summit in Gleneagles in 2005. And as you say, some of the G8 countries have failed to live up to their promises. How optimistic are African nations that this G8 summit will come up with anything extra?
Well, what they've been telling me is that all they can do is just hope that this G8 summit will be different. Angela Merkel has been saying that she wants Africa pushed, she wants it high on the agenda. African leaders have been calling out for more tangible results to come out of it. But again, if history is anything to go by, a lot of the leaders at these summits have made promises and failed to deliver, particularly in instances like aid, where African countries are saying they haven't received the aid they've required. They're saying more needs to be addressed and nothing has been done to that effect. The issue of trade hasn't been addressed as well. As it is, some African countries can't actively participate on the international market in terms of selling the agricultural produce. They want that adjusted as well. That hasn't been defined. The issue of climate change is also affecting Africa. There's lots of drought. Some areas are experiencing heavy flooding. They want G8 countries to cut their carbon emissions to help reverse some of the effects that we're seeing on the ground in Africa. But all they can say is that they hope for positive developments. But like you said, other issues seem to be dominating the agenda ahead of the summit before it begins on Wednesday. So they hope that these issues will not override more important issues to them, like Africa and eradicating poverty.
OK, Harry Mutasa with the latest in Rostock. Many thanks.
Also coming up this hour on Aljazeera, troubled times ahead for Spain. 5 months after Madrid's airport bombing, ETA calls off its ceasefire. We'll be coming live from the Spanish capital.
He took over as the Taliban's military commander after his brother was killed by US-led Afghan forces last month.
Now, in an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera, Mansour Dadullah claims not only is Osama bin Laden alive, but he's still issuing orders to his commanders. From Kabul, James Bays reports.
This is the first ever interview with Haji Mansour Dadullah. He's the younger brother of the Taliban's best-known and most feared commander, and is believed to have taken his place as the Taliban's head of military operations. His older brother was killed last month in a special forces operation. NATO sources tell me he was tracked crossing the border from Pakistan. In the interview, the younger Dadullah claims that Osama bin Laden is alive and well and involved in personally directing the battle against NATO and the Americans, claims it's obviously impossible to independently verify.
Sheikh Osama bin Laden is alive and active. He's carrying out his duties. The latest proof that he is alive and well is that he sent me a letter of condolences after the martyrdom of my brother, and he advised me to follow my brother's path.
He's then asked why bin Laden is in hiding.
Sheikh Osama prefers not to be seen or meet anyone because if he makes himself available to the media, maybe he will be facing danger. His presence is an honor to all of us. We don't want to lose him. I also ask him not to meet anyone and remain in hiding and continue to give his instructions to the commanders so that Al-Qaeda would remain alive and continue its activities all over the world.
Mullah Dadullah's death was a major blow to the Taliban, but they've been continuing to plan and carry out operations. These Taliban fighters were filmed by Aljazeera in Zabul province in southern Afghanistan in the last few days. They travel by motorcycle and in small groups to avoid detection from the air. In a related development, the Taliban say they've killed one of 4 healthcare workers they've been holding hostage for over 3 months. They say it's because the government reneged on a promise to hand over Mullah Dadullah's body. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
The Basque separatist group ETA has announced that it will end a permanent ceasefire declared last year in just over an hour from now.
Well, the group has warned of new attacks on all fronts, accusing the Spanish government of persecution instead of negotiation. From the Spanish capital, Madrid, our correspondent Tim Friend sent this report.
The devastation that ETA can cause is clear. Building contractors are still repairing a multi-storey car park at Madrid airport, bombed last December. 2 Ecuadorian immigrants were killed in the attack. A huge device, 800 kilos of explosives, left in a van. The Spanish Prime Minister says he's alarmed and saddened by ETA's latest announcement.
ETA's decision is absolutely the opposite of what Basque and Spanish society want, the road to peace. A road with a single destination, the giving up of all weapons. A road that can only be walked with a serious commitment to stop violence.
ETA announced its ceasefire in March last year, but any peace process has been dogged by upheavals. In the Basque country of northern Spain, local people desperately want peace.
I just want this to end. I want them to sit down and start a dialogue to end the conflict. That's what we all wish for. Both sides need to make concessions and create opportunities to talk. I'm fed up. Dialogue is what we need.
It had a huge impact on me this morning. I thought things were going to stay quiet, and the news has distressed me. On top of everything, at midnight they could start killing again. I feel really disappointed.
Here in Spain, ETA's announcement has caused little surprise because most people had felt that in effect the ceasefire was already over following last December's attack, the result of a hardline faction within the armed group winning supremacy. Over 4 decades, ETA has killed 800 people, but as a result of intensive police activity in Spain and France, its capacity to carry out attacks is thought to have been reduced.
If it is true that ETA is responsible for breaking the ceasefire, it is also true that the Spanish government and the Basque Nationalist Party are to blame for the failure and collapse of the so-called peace process.
ETA may return to a more low-level campaign of violence aimed at Spain's vital tourist industry rather than people. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Madrid.
And we can cross live to Madrid now, where we can speak to Tim. Tim, a palpable sense of disappointment that the ceasefire is over from the people you talked to in your report. Is there a sense of fear too about what may come next?
Well, I certainly think there is, Stephen. Just behind me here, you can see the edge of Madrid airport where that bomb went off last December. And if ever proof was needed of the kind of occasionally spectacular attacks that ETA was capable of, then that was it. They're still having to do the repairs even as we talk. There's less than an hour to go before this ceasefire officially ends, and although I think most Spanish people felt that ETA was back in action last December after that airport bomb, this official announcement does signal, I think, a change of mood. And the other concern is that during this ceasefire, it's quite possible that ETA was rebuilding its resources. In the run-up to that ceasefire, as I was saying, it was felt that some of their capacity had diminished somewhat, but the fear is that during that layoff, as it were, they've managed to replenish their arms and may be prepared to carry out further attacks in the very near future.
Is there political fallout from the end of the ceasefire too, Tim? Because general elections are due next year. So is there a sense of failure at Zapatero's, if you like, dislike of trying to engage better sooner in the political process?
Well, I think there is a sense of failure, but as far as Parliament goes, there's certainly a consensus in condemning this latest move by ETA. The opposition have made it very clear today that they also are against, obviously, ETA resuming activities and are backing the Prime Minister, but clearly they need to re-engage, and so far during this ceasefire period that there have been very tenuous contacts. We believe that emissaries from both sides have met in Norway to discuss possible routes to peace, but certainly we've seen no real results from that. I suspect ETA will have their eye, as you indicate, on that general election next spring, where there may be a change of political climate in Spain. They may be able to re-engage politically. So in the meantime, it will indeed be interesting to see what form any resumed armed campaign may take, because it's quite possible as well that they will want to leave at least some room to resume negotiation, political negotiation.
Tim Friend in Madrid. Thanks, Tim.
Still to come on Aljazeera, lies, obstruction and now prison for the US Vice President's former top aide, Scooter Libby.
And as the G8 gets ready to meet in Germany to solve the world's problems, we report on struggles closer to home.
So, a former top White House advisor has been jailed for 2.5 years and fined $250,000 for lying to a CIA leak investigation.
Louis Scooter Libby was a top aide to Vice President Dick Cheney, and he's credited with helping shape America's war policies. He's now the highest-ranking US official convicted of a crime since the Iran-Contra affair of the mid-1980s. Al Jazeera's Anna Naidu reports from Washington.
Louis Scooter Libby, the former chief of staff to Vice President Dick Cheney, is the highest-ranking government official to be convicted in 20 years. He was found guilty last March of obstructing justice, perjury and lying to the FBI. The court is still hearing arguments on when Libby will go to jail. That's an issue that could have key political consequences. If the judge grants bail, Libby can remain free through the appeals process and will probably be pardoned by President Bush at the end of his term in 2009. But if the court orders Libby to prison immediately, then the pressure will be on Bush to grant a pardon right away, and that could open the floodgates of criticism for an already embattled president. Predictably, the whole issue of a pardon is stirring up emotions on both sides of the divide.
I think the president should pardon Mr. Libby. I think the prosecution involved has been fundamentally flawed. It was a very politicized prosecution.
President Bush has to look at what Scooter Libby did and what the jury found on its own merits. And, the jury found, I think, that the evidence was pretty convincing on this.
The case stems from the exposure of former CIA agent Valerie Plame. Libby was not found guilty of revealing the covert agent's identity, but of obstructing the investigation into that case. The court received more than 160 letters, including some from some top officials, asking the judge to be lenient on Libby. Whether those so-called character witnesses will have an effect on the court remains to be seen. Anand Naidu, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Cuba is getting ready to watch the first interview given by leader Fidel Castro since he became ill and disappeared from public view 10 months ago. In an excerpt released by Cuban state television, the 8-year-old looks fit and vibrant. The interview will air in Cuba on Tuesday.
Police in Kenya have killed more than 20 members of an outlawed religious sect. A gunfight broke out after police pursued the Monkey group in connection with the death of 2 officers. The group is also accused of killing 14 people in recent months, many of whom had been beheaded.
Colombian President Alvaro Uribe has just released 56 FARC guerrillas from prison in an effort to encourage the group to release hostages it's holding. The release has come a day after the president freed Rodrigo Granda, one of the FARC's group's highest-ranking members. But FARC have so far rejected the idea of a prisoner swap, saying the government hasn't delivered on a number of the group's demands.
In northern Lebanon, at least 12 of the Fatah al-Islam group battling Lebanese troops have surrendered and handed in their weapons, but the fighting continues.
But the violence isn't just confined to the north. In the capital, Beirut, there have been 4 bomb blasts in less than a month in and around the city. The latest on Monday injured 12 people in a Christian suburb. Aljazeera's Mike Hanna reports on the frustrations felt by some local people at the lack of progress in finding who did it.
Ugly devastation in the glowing summer light. The bomb planted in a parked minibus, creating havoc in the suburb of Saad al-Bushweir. This is a predominantly Christian area. But the bombings over the past 2 weeks show no sectarian pattern, no defined political intent. The random nature all the more threatening to those who live and work in the city. And as yet no announcement from those investigating the attacks as to any progress. No indication that they have any leads, or indeed any idea as to who might be responsible. Some, like shop owner Hannah Akel, are furious that the bombers have not been caught. I blame the government, all in the government, he says. It's responsible for the good and the bad here. But others, like Raymond Kurfal, intent on resuming normal service at his pharmacy, are more forgiving of those investigating the attacks. I can't blame the police because they are unable to do anything. There's no developed security apparatus to catch the bombers, he says. We don't have the security technology to deal with such situations. You can't blame anyone specifically, adds Joseph Saba, who was slightly injured in the blast. All we can hope for is the government to try and work hard in the investigation and pay for the damage. Differing points of view as to the investigation, but throbbing in these streets one point of agreement, that if the bombing campaign is aimed at disrupting life, it will not succeed. I want to say something to those who are interfering in Lebanon, says Joseph Mubarak. We are not going anywhere. We are going to rebuild our country and it will flourish forever.
People in Lebanon like to live, like to forget, like to continue their life, to get happy.
The people of this city are intent on living normal lives, on marching forward to a better future. But the harsh reality that their hopes of more peaceful times are being repeatedly blown away. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Let's return now to our top story, the G8 summit, where in the next 24 hours, 8 of the most powerful men and women in the world will gather to discuss crucial issues.
And of course, global poverty will again be trying to push its way to the top of the agenda. 3 years ago at Gleneagles, world leaders promised a massive increase in aid, especially to Africa.
But it seems that they haven't quite fulfilled those promises, even at home. From Streisand, at the home constituency of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Nazanin Moshiri reports on one of Germany's poorest regions.
We shall work to reduce drastically the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty.
These tower blocks are one of the few remnants of the region's communist past. For many of Stralsund's residents, this is the only housing they can afford. This used to be a bustling port town, but not anymore. Most of its shipyards and factories closed after Germany's reunification in 1989. Many headed to West Germany to look for employment. Mariek's one of those who stayed behind. She's one of thousands of people out of work. She told me it's difficult not being able to plan her life.
You can't live your life like you want to. Job, family, children, a nice home. You always have to scrimp and save money. You are only just existing.
Clearly distraught, she asked us to stop filming. When Angela Merkel became Germany's Chancellor, she put Stralsund, her own constituency, on the map. When President Bush visited here last year, there was hope his trip would bring about change.
But Stralsund can't seem to attract the kind of investment it needs. People are worried the G8 summit is an expense the region just can't afford.
Letztendlich versucht das Land mit diesem Gipfel auch die
The region has tried to draw attention to itself and hopes this summit will bring more economic support. But people living here really view the summit as an expensive price to pay.
Germans here aren't comparing their plight to the kind of poverty found in developing nations. But living costs are so high, the German Red Cross has set up this food collection centre in the town.
These are not the kind of images you'd associate with a rich and prosperous Germany. People are here to collect a basket of food for little more than $1. There's anger that almost 2 decades on from reunification, daily life for many still remains a struggle.
People here are hoping G8's leaders won't ignore the poverty that exists right here on its doorstep. Nazanin Bashiri, Aljazeera, Stralsund, Germany.
Well, over the past few years, poverty has been at the forefront of the G8 agenda. In 2005, the G8 leaders met at Gleneagles in Scotland. Important progress was made in securing extra aid and some debt cancellation. And as part of the Make Poverty History campaign launched that year, G8 promised to increase annual aid levels by $50 billion by 2010, half of which was intended for Africa. But despite all those promises, the latest figures from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development show that aid actually fell in 2006 for the first time since 1997. At $103 billion, global aid remains at just 25% of what the US has spent on the war in Iraq. And most shockingly, according to the charity Oxfam, last year the world spent more on bottled water than it did on overseas aid. And Oxfam estimates that based on current trends, G8 will miss its 2010 target by $30 billion, costing the lives of 5 million people.
Well, with me now in the studio is Dapo Oyewole from the Centre for African Policy and Peace Strategy. Thanks again for coming in to Al Jazeera. A very gloomy set of figures there that Steve was just reading out. One charity saying this week the G8 leaders are just defrauding the public and failing Africa. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think all the indicators point in that direction as the 8 most powerful nations, most powerful leaders of the world's richest nations gather in Heiligendamm, which is a salubrious beach resort. They must not forget that they do have a responsibility towards the other developing countries. When they met, like your colleague said, in 2005, they came out with grand declarations. They said they were going to help to reduce Africa's debt. They said they were going to increase aid. They also said that they were going to ensure that the global mechanisms of trade will be changed to create an opportunity for Africa to trade more profitably on the international stage. Unfortunately, they are falling short in every aspect of that. While there's been some progress in terms of debt cancellation, a whole lot more needs to be done. What we wanted was 100% debt cancellation, but what has happened is about only 65%. The critical issue is that debt cancellation provides an opportunity for African countries to be able to spend more on the critical issues that save lives: water, roads, education, and things of that nature. Unfortunately, we do not see the G8 leaders having kept to their promises, and I think as they gather, they really need to bow their heads in shame.
I would think certainly the British Prime Minister would say that the achievement of Gleneagles was the agreement to cancel world debt. How much of a difference has that made in the 2 years since that pledge was made? You said only 65% has been cancelled, but has that made a difference already?
It has. In countries like Ghana and places like Mali, for example, you find that because those countries have stopped spending huge percentages of their national budget on servicing debts to countries that actually don't need the money, you find that they've been able to invest a whole lot more in free education for children, and particularly in the health services, in construction of road and provision of water. These are critical issues to saving lives. Unfortunately, not enough African countries or even countries in developed parts of the world have been given the kind of debt cancellation. And quite importantly, there is this new dimension of what they call vulture funds, whereby private companies buy the debts of African countries or developing countries. They buy the debts and then sue those same countries for those same debts about 3-4 times the price. So there you find that while the G8 countries on one hand are saying that they're trying to reduce debt, you find that private companies operating within G8 countries themselves are actually exploiting African countries, poorer countries, to make profits for themselves. This needs to be stopped.
Very briefly, are you at all optimistic that anything good will come out of this week's meeting?
I think we have scope to be optimistic if civil society within African countries as well as in G8 countries are able to ensure that they hold their leaders to account. And how can they do this? Well, the political power is there. The reality is that these G8 leaders are politicians. They need to be re-elected. If people put their votes where their mouths are, you will find that changes will be made. You will also find that if consumer power is used to force multinational companies to do right in their investments in Africa, then maybe G8 leaders will start doing what they should really understand is in the common interest of global security as well as poverty reduction across the world.
Okay, Dapo Oyewole, good to see you again. Thank you.
Likewise.
Down.